Crackdown. When Crackdown hit the Xbox 360 in 2007, most gamers didn't rush to stores for the game itself. They wanted the Halo 3 beta code it came packaged with. But once people actually booted it up, they discovered one of the most addictive open-world sandboxes of its time. You played as a genetically enhanced super agent, leaping across skyscrapers, tossing cars like toys, and raining chaos down on crime syndicates that controlled the city. The hook was progression. Every orb you collected made you stronger, faster, and more ridiculous. It wasn't about story, it was about pure, unfiltered freedom. Graphically, it had this bold style that made explosions pop and neon-lit rooftops glow. The game was far from perfect. Its missions could get repetitive, but the sheer joy of powering up and experimenting with physics kept players hooked. Crackdown became a hit, even winning some awards along the way. Sequels followed, but they never captured the lightning-in-a-bottle energy of the original. It's a game that shocked players by being way better than its marketing. The Simpsons Road Rage. When The Simpsons Road Rage landed in 2001, it felt like every gamer instantly spotted what it was copying. Sega's Crazy Taxi had blown up just 2 years earlier, and Road Rage was essentially the same formula. Pick up passengers, race them to their destinations, and rack up cash before the timer runs out. Only this time, instead of punk rock and arcades, you had Springfield, Homer's pink sedan, and a cast of iconic characters cracking one-liners during every ride. For fans of The Simpsons, it was a dream. Chaotic driving paired with all the humor you'd expect from the show. But Sega wasn't laughing. They actually filed a lawsuit against Fox Interactive and EA, claiming the game was a blatant ripoff of Crazy Taxi's patented mechanics. The case eventually settled out of court, but the controversy left a permanent shadow over the game. Still, Road Rage sold over 1 million copies, landing on PS2, Xbox, and GameCube at a time when Simpsons fever was still massive. Critics called it repetitive and clunky, but younger players didn't care. They just wanted to hear Grandpa Simpson complain in the back seat. Today, it's one of those forgotten spin-offs that you wouldn't mind playing every once in a while. Destroy All Humans. In 2005, Destroy All Humans flipped the script on the alien invasion story. Instead of saving Earth, you played as Cryptosporidium 137, a snarky alien sent to harvest human DNA and mock everything about 1950s America. Armed with a flying saucer and mind control powers, Crypto turned small towns into playgrounds of destruction. What really made it stand out was the tone, equal parts parody of Cold War paranoia and love letter to B-movie sci-fi. It didn't take itself seriously, and that's exactly why it worked. The game's open environments encouraged players to play however they wanted, whether it was disguising themselves as humans to infiltrate military bases or just vaporizing cows for laughs. Underneath the comedy, the mechanics were surprisingly solid. Crypto's psychic powers and jetpack were fun to chain together, and piloting the UFO to reduce whole towns to rubble was as satisfying as gaming gets. It had originality and humor, though some noted the missions could feel repetitive. Despite that, it sold well enough to spawn sequels and eventually a modern remake in 2020. Still, nothing hits quite like the original. For many, Destroy All Humans is that weird, hilarious game they played once, loved, and then forgot about for years to come, until they hear about it in some random video on YouTube. Resonance of Fate. Released in 2010 for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, Resonance of Fate was unlike any RPG most people had ever played. Developed by Tri-Ace, the studio behind Star Ocean, it ditched the usual swords and sorcery formula for a gritty, steampunk-inspired world. The game's most defining feature was its combat system, a bizarre mix of turn-based strategy and over-the-top gunplay that looked more like a John Woo movie than a traditional RPG. Characters would dive through the air in slow motion, dual-wield pistols, and juggle enemies mid-combat, all while players carefully planned their hero actions. It was ambitious, stylish, and unapologetically complex. The issue was that its complexity scared a lot of players away. Tutorials barely scratched the surface, and the difficulty curve was brutal if you didn't master the mechanics early. Some loved its originality, others called it frustrating and inaccessible. Commercially, it struggled, especially launching so close to Final Fantasy XIII, which overshadowed it completely. Yet over time, Resonance of Fate earned a cult following, with fans praising its unique setting, soundtrack, and daring combat design. It's one of those titles that people respect more in hindsight, a game that dared to be different, even if it scared most players off. Heart of Darkness. Back in 1998, Heart of Darkness arrived on PlayStation and PC after nearly 6 years of development. At first glance, it looked like another side-scrolling platformer, but the game carried a darker edge than most kids expected. You played as Andy, a boy on a mission to rescue his dog, Whiskey, from shadowy creatures in a surreal world. That setup sounds simple enough, but the execution was shockingly brutal. Andy dies in gruesome ways, swallowed by monsters, vaporized by blast, or crushed in nightmarish traps. For a game marketed towards younger audiences, it leaned way harder into horror imagery than anyone anticipated. What set Heart of Darkness apart was its cinematic presentation. It featured full motion cutscenes with orchestral music by Bruce Broughton, best known in film for The Rescuers Down Under and Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. The visuals were hand-drawn and fluid, creating a world that felt alive and terrifying at the same time. Critics praised its ambition, but they also noted how unforgiving it was. One mistake often meant instant death, forcing players to memorize levels trial by trial. It didn't sell particularly well, overshadowed by bigger titles of the late 90s. Still, it carved out a reputation as one of the strangest kids games ever made, equal parts enchanting and unsettling. PsyOps: The Mindgate Conspiracy. In 2004, Midway released PsyOps: The Mindgate Conspiracy, a third-person shooter that looked fairly standard at first. Guns, military bases, and a shadowy conspiracy plot. But the twist was psychic powers, and that single mechanic transformed it into something unforgettable. Players controlled Nick Scryer, a soldier with amnesia who slowly regained telekinetic abilities, pyrokinesis, mind control, and even astral projection. Suddenly, firefights weren't just about pulling a trigger. You could fling enemies across rooms, set them on fire, or use their own weapons against them. What made the game so ahead of its time was how interactive the physics was. You weren't limited to scripted set pieces. The environment was your playground. If you wanted to hurl barrels, rip doors off hinges, or puppet enemies into shooting their allies, the game let you. It felt more like a precursor to something like Control or Half-Life 2 than just another mid-2000s shooter. Critics praised its creativity but noted the story itself was forgettable and the ending left threads unresolved. A sequel was planned but never happened, leaving PsyOps as a fascinating one-off. For many, it's that game they vaguely remember as the shooter where you could throw people with your mind, a concept still waiting to be fully realized. This next one I haven't thought about in years. Do you remember it? Let me know in the comments. DJ Hero. When DJ Hero launched in 2009, it was Activision's attempt to expand the music game craze beyond Guitar Hero and Rock Band. Instead of guitars or drums, players got a custom plastic turntable with buttons, a crossfader, and a spinning disc. The concept was bold, remix culture brought into living rooms where you could scratch, mix tracks, and transition between two songs on the fly. The soundtrack was stacked with mashups, blending artists like Jay-Z and Eminem with rock, funk, and electronic hits. For anyone into DJ culture, it felt like a fresh spin on rhythm gaming. By 2009, the music game bubble was starting to burst. People were already drowning in plastic instruments, and asking them to buy another pricey peripheral, this time for a brand new concept, was a tough sell. Critics loved the soundtrack and the unique mechanics, praising how polished it felt, but casual players weren't ready to learn a totally new system. Sales lagged behind expectations, and despite a sequel and big-name endorsements, DJ Hero quietly faded out of the spotlight. Looking back, it was one of the most inventive rhythm games ever made, a rare title that genuinely tried to push the genre forward. But like so many trends in gaming, it disappeared as quickly as it arrived. Picross 3D. Released on the Nintendo DS, Picross 3D took the already addictive number puzzle formula of traditional Picross and added a whole new dimension, literally. Instead of filling in squares on a flat grid, players chipped away at 3D cubes, using numerical clues to sculpt hidden objects. One puzzle might reveal a chair, another a dolphin, or even something as oddly specific as a teapot. It was part puzzle, part sculpture, and part brain training exercise that fit perfectly with the DS's stylus controls. What made Picross 3D so special was how deceptively relaxing it could be. Each solved puzzle felt like unwrapping a mystery, and the satisfaction of revealing the unfinished shape was hard to match. The game slowly introduced new rules and difficulty levels, keeping the challenge fresh without overwhelming new players. Critics praised its clever design and just one more puzzle appeal, calling it one of the DS' hidden gems. Despite its brilliance, it never achieved mainstream recognition outside puzzle fans. It sold modestly compared to Nintendo's bigger franchises, and most casual players barely remember it existed. A sequel, Picross 3D Round 2, eventually came to 3DS years later, but the original remains one of those DS curiosities you either loved obsessively or completely forgot about. Kirby Superstar Ultra. In 2008, Nintendo brought back a fan favorite with Kirby Superstar Ultra for the Nintendo DS, a full remake of the beloved SNES title Kirby Superstar. On the surface, it looked like a simple re-release, but the game packed in far more than nostalgia. It featured enhanced graphics, remastered cutscenes, and all the classic sub-games like Spring Breeze and The Great Cave Offensive. But Ultra went further, adding brand new modes such as Revenge of the King and Meta Nightmare Ultra, which let players experience the story from Meta Knight's perspective. The charm of Superstar Ultra was in its variety. Instead of one long campaign, it delivered multiple bite-sized adventures, each with unique twists on Kirby's copy abilities. Whether you were speeding through levels, exploring massive treasure-filled labyrinths, or teaming up with allies, there was always something different to do. The DS's portability made it even easier to jump into short sessions, keeping the game endlessly replayable. Its content-rich package, colorful presentation, and polished controls made it one of the best Kirby games ever made. Yet, despite strong reviews and sales, it's rarely the first title people bring up when talking about Kirby. For many, it's become that overlooked gem, overshadowed by bigger Nintendo releases, but still one of the pink puffball's finest outings, Thief. Thief quietly redefined what stealth games could be. At a time when most first-person titles were about fast shooting and big explosions, Thief slowed everything down. You played as Garrett, a cynical master thief navigating a dark city filled with guards, shadows, and secrets. Instead of overpowering enemies, you hid in darkness, leaned around corners, and used sound as much as sight. Every footstep, every creaking door, every clink of an arrow could give you away. It was tense, methodical, and unlike anything else on the market. The game pioneered light and shadow as actual gameplay mechanics, forcing players to watch visibility meters and carefully plan their movements. It wasn't just about sneaking, it was about feeling vulnerable in a world that didn't want you there. The eerie atmosphere, combined with a haunting score and surprisingly deep world building, gave Thief an identity that set it apart from its peers. Critics hailed it as groundbreaking, but its slower pace meant it never hit mainstream popularity. Sequels followed, each pushing stealth further, but the original remains a cult classic. For many players, Thief is one of those games you remember if you were there at the time, and if not, you've probably forgotten it ever existed. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below.